fee. We have one speaker who's still on his way. He should be here in about 10 minutes. All right, we've got our 2 virtual speakers as well. Can you hear us okay? Okay. Can you unmute so that we can make sure we hear you?
That's the first time anyone's asked me to unmute.
Well, we can hear you, Leila. Amar?
Yep. All good on my end?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. We are also live streaming on YouTube, so I just shared the link on our Instagram if you want to send that out to your friends who could not make it tonight. My name is Jinan. I'm the program director here at Palestine House of Freedom, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. How many of you, is this your first time in our space? I love seeing so many new people. This is amazing. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So a little bit about who we are. Palestine House of Freedom is a nonprofit education-based organization. We got the space officially in March last year, but we went public at the end of July with our flag-raising ceremony and the sign unveiling, which you all walked through. We also have a flag in the courtyard, which you can usually see when it's not nighttime. And what we want to do is educate the public on Palestine, from lawmakers all the way down to the general public. And we want to do that in ways that are accessible and easy for people to digest. So we host events like this throughout the month. We also do an online monthly podcast called Palestine Connect. We also host online events. We partner with a lot of different organizations in the community. Earlier this month, we did an event with a group called Batikh, who did an open mic night and raised funds for mutual aid in Gaza. So we like to do a lot of variety of things, but we also do online campaigns. We take down reports by Amnesty, the UN, and break them down to make them more digestible for the public. Oh, sorry. Is that like echoing? Is that me? Is that my voice? Oh, okay. And I guess I sound really good. And so for us, we want to be able to connect with people on all levels when it comes to Palestine. We welcome everyone to come into our space. We are open for telework hours during our visitor hours, Tuesdays through Thursdays, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And as you've noticed, we have some art and some photographs on the wall. We are an art space as well. This month, we're featuring the DC Protest Photography Art Exhibit that launched last week. These are all photos from 23 photographers who took photos during the 16 months of the genocide in Washington, D.C. at multiple different protests, the encampments, a lot of like the civil disobedience events. And this is going to be up until the 23rd. And then we also let people come here and host their own events. So if you have an organization or you want to host a meeting, we do open the space free of charge for people to come. If you have like a group, if you want to host like a private event for, whatever cause for Palestine that you are supporting, we are happy to discuss that and to help you with that. My cards are on the table here. You guys can pick them up on your way out and email us with any suggestions that you have. We're very lucky to have the support of this community. And because we do so many events for the community free of charge, we are a nonprofit. And so donations help us a lot. Now, I know a lot of you who registered today, thank you very much. You added extra donations to your ticket, and we really appreciate that. We would hope that you would consider becoming a monthly donor to help us sustain. $10, $15, $20 a month can actually go a very long way for us in order to be able to keep the space open and allow people to come in here and use the space for what they need and to be a space for people who support Palestine. Our mission, we have 2 missions. One is to dismantle apartheid, because we know that Palestinians can only be free if we dismantle apartheid. There's no question about it. If the occupying state does not exist, Palestinians would not be suffering the way that they are. And the second thing is to create a one state for all citizens with equal rights from the river to the sea. And we feel that that is the pathway to peace. That is really the only way that we can do things in order for Palestinians to achieve full liberation. I want to shout out our volunteers tonight. Raise your hands. I'm so lucky to have incredible volunteers who help, because it's really just me and Miko in this space, if you didn't know. We're the only staff. Miko's the director, which means I do everything else. And he'll admit it. And so the volunteers are just literally my backbone, and they help me with these events because I could not do this on my own. And then we also have Leila, who's actually here from El Khalil, from Hebron, Palestine, who is selling a lot of stuff that she actually brought with her from Palestine. So please make sure you go back there and check out her stuff. Buy some gifts for people, birthdays. Arab Mother's Day is coming up. There's a lot of things. Ramadan, Eid. Eid's in like 2 months at this point, so it's coming soon. Easter, whatever you celebrate. And so we are going to get started with our panels. Omar has the flu, but he's good otherwise. This is why he couldn't be here today. And then Leila, mashallah, has a family and kids, and there's like so much going on. And she lives all the way up in Maryland, so it's very hard for her to come down during rush hour. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I'll hand it over to Miko, who's going to be the moderator for tonight. So first off, we have Omar Baddad, who's a political analyst and is a Palestinian American. I'm sure you've seen him on the news a lot. His commentary is respected. It's very concise. It is needed in this time, and he has been a very strong voice on Palestine. Leila Al-Haddad is from Gaza, and she is a chef and an author, award-winning author. Some of you may recognize her because she was on an episode with Anthony Bourdain, may he rest in peace, where he actually visited Gaza and was highlighting Gaza cuisine. I've attended some of Leila's events, and her food is phenomenal. Here in the room, we have Aya Ziadeh. She's one of my friends, so I'm just going to, give her some props. Aya is a human rights scholar and does a lot of policy work around Palestine and in general for rights here in America. And then Brian Becker, who is running late but should be here shortly, is the leader for Answer Coalition and the head of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm sure some of you have seen him. They have done a lot of protests and events for Palestine in the last 16 months as well. And then our moderator, Miko Peled, who many of you know, is an author, wrote The General Son, Injustice, the Holy Land Foundation 5, and is the founder and president of Palestine House of Freedom. So thank you for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to Miko.
Okay, thank you, Janan, for doing everything. It's true. Ask anyone. And thank you all for being here, and thank you so much for our guests. Leila, thank you, Omar. Aya, and of course, Brian when he gets here. Max Blumenthal was going to be here too, but he can't make it. So the topic we want to discuss, we chose to discuss today, has to do with Gaza. Post, or not, maybe not post, but that's something we'll discuss. Are we post-genocide or not? Post-ceasefire, is it really a ceasefire or not? I mean, is it a ceasefire when they stop killing Palestinians in one part of Palestine, but they're still killing Palestinians in other parts of Palestine, and Palestinian freedom is nowhere even on the agenda? So is it really a ceasefire? And the part of the conversation, a very important part of the conversation, is how we describe these things and how we do we fall into the traps of the Zionist discourse, or are we able to carve out and create our own conversation using terminology that we know to be truthful? So, for example, the ceasefire, is it really a ceasefire if they only stop killing people in one part of Palestine? Is the Gaza Strip really an entity on its own, or is it what I believe is actually a concentration camp as opposed to some kind of an entity? The same thing with the West Bank. Is there really a West Bank anymore? Is there such a thing as occupied Palestinian territories as opposed to other territories in Palestine that are not occupied? Because if we say occupied Palestinian territories, that might mean that there's some parts of Palestine that are not occupied, and if so, can somebody point them out? And then there's this a term that people use where they say Israel and Palestine, or Israel-Palestine, or Israel proper. And if there's such a thing as Israel proper, again, the question that I would ask is, what is it and where is it and what is proper about it? So these are all important conversations to have. As we focus on Gaza, it's impossible really not to talk about all these other things, but we're going to try to focus as much as possible on Gaza. And Leila, if I may, I'd like to start with you, and just kind of give us an overview, your thoughts. You're from Gaza. Your thoughts at this point in general would be great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that summary, Miko. And even though I can't see everyone, I'm glad to be here with you all. My first time speaking at Dar al-Hurriya. So it's always wonderful to have a very welcoming space like this. And, well, I just want to say also, I'm not a chef, but everyone says that. So just putting that out there, I feel like that's something that's, a title that's not deserved. But anyway, actually, I want to start by reading the translation of a message that one of my cousins in Gaza, we have a family WhatsApp, and, some of my cousins, about half have remained in the north from the beginning or have been able to. Some were driven forcibly from their homes, this one in particular, by 14 Israeli soldiers in the middle of the night back in April with her elderly in-laws and forced to down 10 hours. She remains in central Gaza, whereas a couple of the others have returned to Gaza City. And I just thought her message kind of sums up what you just said, which is essentially everyone is grateful and, has breathed a huge sigh of relief that at least there is, whatever you want to call it, some semblance of a ceasefire, although not in its truest form, that at least, the full-fledged war/genocide for temporarily at least has halted. If anyone saw the comments earlier about how, just as they can negotiate release of captives, they can just as easily and look forward to returning to genocide, war, and of course they didn't say genocide. But anyway, but at the same time, everyone is of course extremely wary and asking the very questions that you had just posited, which is, is it truly a ceasefire? What happens next? What are we returning to? A status quo that is untenable? What of the rest of Palestine, and so on and so forth. And so she said, and again, this is a translation, and the heart refuses to find peace. The eyes refuse to dry, and the terrifying question remains, has the war truly ended or has it not? And if it has, will it return? I thought I would rejoice and feel at ease, just like the people of Gaza. Once a ceasefire was announced, I imagined myself rushing back to my home, to my life in my beloved city, Gaza. But the new war that was written upon us, then a maze of questions. Where do I return? To whom? And how? As for the where, my home is uninhabitable and my family's house lacks the essentials for life with no infrastructure to sustain it. And for whom? The family I love is no longer there. The flowers of my friendships have become martyrs. Only my sister remains, the only tie binding me to this place. And how? As if I would have to cross through the Ismailiyah ferry crossing, the army's imposed border between northern and southern Gaza for 2 days just to reach what used to be my home. Or perhaps I would have to walk along its shores, witnessing the destruction with every step, arriving exhausted only to find no water to wash away the dust, no bed to rest upon, and no shelter to call my own. For now, I remain in the south, fearing the hardship of starting over again, and our hearts have already borne more than they can endure. Oh Allah, may at least speaking, on behalf of my family, but even in larger WhatsApp groups that we have of Palestinians from Gaza here in the United States, everyone is kind of holding their breath, obviously relieved, but kind of, can't really rest assured or be confident, translating from Arabic, that there will be any kind of what's to come, essentially, right? Because like the moment that the rest of the captives are released or the bodies or whatever, then what, right? Sort of every red line has already been breached. And so there's nothing to, I would say, prevent, Israel from going right back at it, right? And so that's, I think, the reality that we face right now, beyond just the immediate. Then what? Are we going back to a status quo pre-October 7th, right? In which precipitated, right, all this, which itself was not sustainable. So I think there's just a lot of questions right now. But at the same time, there's something to be said about the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that insisted anyway on remaining, on being steadfast, being samidun, on returning, even if it was to the ruins of a home to put a tent up, to so on. I think that was something, I would say, unexpected, maybe not for us, but for maybe a larger global audience. Certainly, I think for the Israelis, it was viewed as, however, I'm trying to find the correct word here, maybe somewhat of a surprise, because as we know, they engineered, in every way possible, a situation that would make Gaza uninhabitable, that would deliberately targeting everything that sustained life, such that even if you wanted to return, you wouldn't be able to live a normal life. So yeah, mixed emotions. I mean, I could go on, but I know there's not much time, and maybe let Omar or others share their thoughts.
Leila, I wanna ask you one thing specifically, if you don't mind. So
Yeah.
what I'm hearing in the Hebrew press and from the politicians in Hebrew is that there's been a promise that the army will go in and, as they describe it, finish the job, continue to kill, continue to destroy Hamas until Hamas is no longer able to govern, until Hamas is no longer able to whatever. Is there any sense? Do you hear anything from people in Gaza about this threat of an impending attack coming back, of the army coming in and to, quote unquote, finish the job, to continue killing?
I think that, as I said, people are most certainly bracing themselves for that possibility. It certainly happened before, after the temporary ceasefire or whatever it was, more than a year ago. So it's hard to say. I wouldn't say that people are just giving up on that reality. I do think, though, that might be tempered. Again, it's really difficult to tell because Trump is such a wild card, and he's busy here with all his executive orders and all this nonsense. But I'm wondering if he would sort of temper Netanyahu only for narcissistic reasons, that he has an agenda here that he wants to deal with. He has an agenda regionally he wants to roll out. And that re-entering Gaza, or I mean, they're still in Gaza, but resuming, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, finishing the job would put a dent in those plans. And truthfully, I don't know what else they would do beyond continue to ravage Gaza more than it's already been ravaged. Perhaps whatever intel they've picked up, in the course of the last 2 weeks, I really don't know. More targets, but I struggle to think about a scenario in which I think it's been a catastrophe, obviously, for the people of Gaza, but I think it was a colossal failure as well for Netanyahu, for whatever stated aims that he had, that Israel had. And if they were to go back, it would only be for the longevity of his own rule, right? To extend his governance and his government coalition.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the promise he made to his coalition partners, that they're stopping now, but they're coming back. And that's the rhetoric. We have to come back. We have to come back. We have to finish the job. And the images now, as we see the hostages being released, this show of force is incredible. And basically, they're also there to maintain some order in this terrible chaos. And so that's driving the Hebrew press and the Israeli politicians absolutely crazy to see this. The fact that they've maintained this show of force even after all this destruction.
Absolutely. And if they were to go back, I would say it would be to sow chaos, to destabilize Gaza even further. This is sort of a tried and true strategy. They've done this before. I could see that possibility.
Omar, can we turn to you? Are you there?
I am indeed. Hi.
Hey, thanks for joining us. So, Omar, I'm just curious about your perspective. Again, are we post-genocide? Are we post a ceasefire? Is there a ceasefire? Just generally, what are your thoughts?
Sure. Let me start by saying that I really wanted to be there in person. I had yet to come to Dar al-Hurriya in person. I've heard that it's a wonderful space, but the flu had different ideas. And in the course of feeling incredibly unpleasant with the flu right now, yet being able to enjoy central heating in my home, the fact that I have running water, and to imagine what it's like to be living in Gaza, where everybody's sick and malnutritioned because of the pollution and the lack of access to clean water, the fact that to use the bathroom you have to get in line behind 50 or 100 people, the fact that you're trying to survive through this winter in a tent, just it really is unbearable what the people of Gaza are being subjected to right now. And to your question, I don't think that there is a ceasefire, if we want to be technical about the use of that word. We've had more than 80 people killed in Gaza since that so-called ceasefire. We have more than 80 people killed in Lebanon since that alleged ceasefire as well. And so really a better term for them is a temporary reduction in the intensity of the slaughter. That is what Gaza and Lebanon are experiencing. And obviously, you see this uptick in the violence in the West Bank. And I worry that even though Donald Trump clearly brought this about for his own ego, he wanted to achieve something that Biden has not been able to achieve, I think that Trump is going to get distracted with all the other chaos that he's creating here domestically in the U.S., to Layla's point. There is no shortage of battles that he's picking, and I think he's going to lose interest in what's happening there. And what's terrifying with Trump is that losing interest in what's happening there while being surrounded by a bunch of fanatics, virtually every person he's appointed to any position of influence over Palestine and Israel is a religious fanatic who believes that Israel should have the entire land from the river to the sea because of biblical prophecy or whatever else. And when those people are left in charge, that means that Trump will most likely give Israel a free hand, a complete free hand, to do whatever it wants. And what Netanyahu wants to do with this opportunity is fully liquidate the Palestinian struggle for freedom and justice once and for all. He sees an opportunity right now. They've basically realized that even though they've paid a significant cost in terms of Israel's public reputation, being wanted by the International Criminal Court, by the ICJ, human rights organizations condemning them for genocide and so on, yet they want to finish the job. They don't want all of that to be for nothing. And finishing the job means eradicating the possibility of Palestinian society surviving this. And I think that's an extremely precarious situation that we are in. Obviously, the resilience of Palestinians, there's not enough that you can say about it. In terms of standing their ground, in terms of moving back to North Gaza when there's nothing to come back to. And the fact they're not going to take the sitting down. We've seen this over and over again for many decades, where Israel continues to be under the illusion that if only you pummel Palestinians enough, you can get them to submit. That has proven to be a failed strategy on Israel's part. And now, if they're going to literally continue killing them until they, quote unquote, thin out the population to a minimum, to use Netanyahu's words, that's a horrifying prospect. And we have to make sure that the world does not accept that and sit by and allow it to happen.
Okay. Let me ask you one more thing, Omar. The conversations, clearly there's a connection between what the discourse from the White House and what is being said by the Israeli government. This idea of what they call migration by choice, or that sort of thing, getting 1.5 million or 2 million Palestinians out somehow. What are your thoughts on that? The plausibility of that, sending them to Indonesia or to Egypt or somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, first, the idea that there's anything voluntary about that. If you destroy an entire area and make it unlivable, and then tell people that you're free to leave, that is not voluntary. Obviously, everybody understands that this is forced displacement. That's what Israel's project is. Now, they wanted to get, and by the way, this is not just a Trump plan. It was a Biden plan as well. His own Secretary of State, Blinken, had visited Egypt early on and was exploring the possibility of expelling Palestinians into the Sinai. And what they were met with is resistance, both at this point also from Egypt and Jordan, saying we're not going to accept the population in Gaza. We're not going to take part in the displacement of Palestinians out of historic Palestine. But what's worrying to me is if Israel simply continues the genocide, if you continue killing 100, 150 Palestinians every single day into the indefinite future, what does that look like? Like, are we literally going to watch Palestinians get obliterated? And at that point, are Palestinians going to be, for the sake of basic human survival, making greater efforts to try to escape that murderous concentration camp when there's absolutely no prospect for things to improve in it? I have been thoroughly disappointed and genuinely surprised. I'm going to say surprised and shocked and disappointed at the scale of Israeli violence and what the world has been willing to put up with. I genuinely was under the impression that when Israel has killed 10,000 or 20,000, that the world was going to say enough is enough. And the fact that we've let them get this far, and the fact that President Trump, for his own personal purposes, was able to put a temporary stop to it, but might allow them to continue, the future is incredibly uncertain. And it really is, it's coming to terms with the sheer callousness of American officials, of Western officials, in that they are watching what Israel has done to Gaza and have yet to put their foot down in any meaningful sense and to actually put a stop to it.
I just wanted to add my 2 cents to that because I actually have to go because I can't find a ride for my girls. So I have to go chauffeur duty. But I wanted to add 2 things, which is to your point, Omar, 2 weeks after this genocide began in 2023, when we still thought, as you were rightly saying, there's no way, like there's a certain, I hate keep using that phrase, red line, but, there's a certain number, right, that will be, at which point it will be no longer acceptable to continue. So we all naively thought that. And so a group of us from Gaza and other Palestinians actually met with Blinken. This was like October 2023. And I remember this is before we quickly realized that they really don't care and we're willing to let this go as far as, And he said something that I can't forget. He said, oh, this is going to get much worse before it gets better. And they don't have a day after that, and neither do we. And I just remember that like echoing through my head. And then after that, we realized this is going to be bad. And we all decided after that we're not engaging with them anymore and so on. And then, of course, I sued them. But anyway, different story. But also one more thing, which is because Miko mentioned earlier, and so did you, about this being much bigger and about all you were talking about all the Trump reportees. And I agree, because I was working a lot on helping some people write some stuff about UNRWA, and I kept thinking about how it's almost like in unison, all of the mainstream media and press, every time we've been trying to propose different op-eds and things, none of them will buy, none of them want to publish anything by anyone involved in UNRWA in a leadership level, or even anyone who's been a beneficiary. And if they're reporting on it, it all has to do with, look, what are the implications? Like aid, right? None of them are talking about the fact that Israeli officials have over and over said, this has nothing to do with the aid, but everything to do with UNRWA as a vehicle, in their words, that perpetuates the Palestinian refugee problem and the inherited status of Palestinian refugees, and keeps the issue of the right of return alive, right? Like were it not for UNRWA, Palestinians would quickly forget about their villages, their ancestral homes, a longing of return, and so on and so forth. And that's really not been, I think, talked about enough. And I think it's all sort of, intertwined and related, that with the temporary, reduction in hostilities, as you rightly say, with the greater Palestinian project.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Thank you, Layla. I'll turn to you. Oh, yeah, it's on the floor there. Sorry. Just again, generally, your thoughts on what we're seeing. Like I said earlier, post-genocide, post-ceasefire. What the hell is going on from your perspective?
What the hell is going on? Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's also my first time coming here, and it's beautiful. I remember Miko and I discussed this vision a year ago when the genocide first started, and it's so nice to see it come to life. And shout out to Janan too, who runs the show. It's really good to be here. So, ceasefire. I think when we think about a ceasefire and like the celebration, I remember when I saw the news that a ceasefire deal was reached, I literally, you would expect excitement, and I just felt numb, and then I just had a complete mental breakdown because, I mean, we've been in the depths of this work for the last year on the U.S. scale. I mean, it's incomparable to being a Palestinian in Gaza, but it's sad that my first thought was now they're going to sit in the devastation and actually like process, and that feels a bit scarier. But I think the matter of the fact is, yes, we celebrate it because it's a moment of rest, but it's not justice by any means, right? What it is it's a means of survival for Palestinians in Gaza. That's literally all it is, and it's the absolute bare minimum required to stop mass slaughter. But unfortunately, it doesn't end the conditions that made the genocide possible to begin with. And I think that's what we're all sitting on right now. For the last 15 months, the apartheid state has systematically obliterated an already suffering area of the world, right? With entire generations wiped out. You're talking about dozens of entire family trees wiped off the map. Infrastructure completely decimated, from hospitals, schools, universities, all of their history gone. All of the centers where they kept any kind of data or history completely destructed. And this kind of devastation is going to take, it's estimated to take decades to build. So it's beyond destruction. Obviously, we know that it's intentional erasure of Palestinian existence. And when we talk about genocide here, I think we talk about it as if it's like this one big thing that happens, and then when it's over, it's over. But the whole point of genocide is to what? It's to destruct an entire people. And so right now, this is exactly what's happening. Part of the genocide was a mass slaughter. It was the killing of the people, but that's not the only goal. It's to completely dehumanize them, even more than Palestinians have been dehumanized on a global scale. And on top of that, we forget that Gaza is under siege, and that siege has not been lifted. It remains in place. The same blockade that's strangled Gaza for nearly 2 decades now continues. And the only difference is that over 90% of Gaza's population is displaced, now for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time, because already 90% of Gaza's population was formerly displaced Palestinians from other parts of occupied Palestine. So you're talking about a people that has experienced displacement on an inhumane scale, on an unimaginable level. And over 100,000 Palestinians have been murdered. And we're just going to start to get the actual number now, because the number is frozen at 40, 50, 60,000, because if even, because the Gaza Ministry of Health stopped being able to calculate how many lives have been taken. That 10,000 people is already a crazy amount. You're talking about 100,000 people. And I think that was one of the most difficult things for me when I saw, a ceasefire has broken. Then I go on Twitter, X, whatever it's called now, and see Palestinians say their first thing is, I'm gonna go find my brother's or my son's or my husband's or my wife's body now so that I can properly bury them and say goodbye to them. So you're talking about unimaginable suffering that exists, and if it were to ever heal, I mean, if I, as a Palestinian in the US that's not even from Gaza, isn't in Gaza, I've completely been transformed after the last year and a half. And this is work that I've been doing since I was 16, but the level of impact that it's had on me, I cannot imagine the devastation, the emotional and mental level of devastation that Palestinians are facing. So to me, calling this post-genocide, it feels very premature because the horror is not over. And like I said earlier, for those that you can't even say had the privilege of surviving the last 15 months, because even they will tell you that death, in Arabic you say arham, al-maut arham, than having existed throughout the genocide. So even if the bombs stopped, obviously the suffering didn't. And then you combine that with the US right? So even in a post-genocide landscape, the Israeli occupation remains in place. And Israel has made it clear that its goal is permanent displacement, ongoing military rule, and an unlivable environment for Palestinians, because they all either want to kill us or they want to drive us out. And that's all they've been doing for the last, even before the Nakba, 80 plus years, right? So this is where the United States comes in. The hand, its hand on the occupation does not end with a ceasefire. But we saw how easy it was for Trump to be like, oh, ceasefire, okay. All of a sudden, the mass slaughter just stops. But something that we have to digest is that no matter who sits in the White House, US policy remains deeply entrenched in supporting Israel. That's just a matter of fact. The difference between administrations is not if they will support Israel. The difference is how they will support Israel. For example, Biden supported Israel as a staunch Zionist. The man has been spouting propaganda since the 60s and 70s. He said if Israel didn't exist, we would need to create one. So just the level of support varies and how they support vary. But it's not a question of will they, because they will. We all know very well that Biden was a partner to genocide through weapons shipments, and now we have Trump to deal with, which is a different discussion that I'm sure I'll be able to talk about later.
Thank you for that. You said something that made me think of something else that I want to ask you as a human rights scholar. So I remember when friends of mine who were arrested immediately after October 7th were released, I don't know, 8 months, a year later, and so on. And we've seen these horrific images of people who came out of imprisonment after less than a year, and they look like shadows of their former selves. It's beyond belief. And many of them commented that, at least in Gaza, they're dead because of the situation in the prisons. Like you said, Arham, it's like it's better to be dead than what is going on in the prisons. And again, as a human rights scholar, we see these images of the prisoners coming out, and also as a Palestinian. What are your thoughts on that? You know, the horrors that they're going through in prison, and forget human rights, forget the rights of prisoners, forget any of that. It's not even mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know that Israel has the most inhumane prisoner system when it comes to Palestinians, not to Israelis. I mean, it's the only state in the world that tries children in military courts. So like that alone should be the scale at which you weigh how cruel Israel is when it comes to its prison system. I mean, everything about it is torturous. From the minute that they detain somebody, they will come into the house in the middle of the night and scare everybody in the house. Literally torture tactics from that moment. They'll speak in Hebrew and give orders in Hebrew, which most Palestinians will not understand if they're in the West Bank. And then they'll detain the person, the father, the mother, the sister, the son, whatever it is, and they'll put them in a prison, and you likely won't know where they are, and then they'll move them a million times, and you won't know where they are. And then a lot of times their lawyer can't reach them because they deny that. And their treatment within the prisons is, I mean, there's no word to describe it. I think the first person that comes to mind is Ahmed Manasra when I think about prisoners, right? Because he's been on my mind the last week with the prisoner exchanges. I keep praying that he's one of the people released. But he was arrested, he was detained when he was 12 years old. He's 21 years old now. And for the last 3 years, they've consistently kept him in solitary confinement. So the boy is schizophrenic now. His mental health issues his entire health is deteriorating. And like last year, he had a court date and his health was so bad that they had to hospitalize him. And he couldn't make it, he couldn't get to the court. And so that's like one level. And then you want to talk about the treatment of women. sexual harassment and assault on both women and men, Palestinian women and men. For women, they don't only sexually harass and assault them, but they'll also blackmail their families, or they'll blackmail the prisoner and create some crazy story to make her family, like pit her family against her or something like that. So, I mean, this is a whole conversation on its own. Israel's prisoner system is crazy, and you see that between the difference of, we're seeing all the imagery come out of the Israeli hostages being released compared to Palestinian prisoners being released, and you can't recognize them. They're unrecognizable. Even like 2 months, if they've only been detained for 2 months, they become unrecognizable. The weight that they lose, the gray hair that they form, even if they're like 25. Like, that speaks for itself. And I mean, that should be the first red flag for the entire world of, okay, wait, first of all, why do we have a 2,000, 3,000 prisoner exchange deal? Why does Israel have that many prisoners? And then you look at the age range. Why are they holding children hostage? And then you look at the impact of them being in prison for, if it's a month, 3 weeks, 3 years, 20 years, it's insane.
And the testimonies are that the conditions post October 7 have worsened by a great deal. And the previous Minister of National Security, who is charged with the prisons, he's been boasting about how much worse he's made it for prisoners. And there's even videos of him walking around in a new prison that was built and peeking through the little hole to see the prisoners inside, and priding himself of how little food they get, and the dogs, and just horrendous stuff. And of course, this is related to Gaza because now we're seeing some of them come out as a result of this exchange. Brian, I want to thank you for coming down from New York for this. You asked me if we were going to do Zoom, and I said no. And then this morning it turned out that we are. So
that was a good trick.
I appreciate you coming down. It was not intentional, but it's good to see you. You and I have been talking about Palestine, about Gaza for many years. You've been commenting and organizing on this issue. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts in general about what we're seeing, this madness that we're seeing right now surrounding Gaza and Palestine.
Sure. Thank you so much, Miko, and it's great to be here. And it is amazing that this space exists with the Palestine flag hanging proudly on Pennsylvania Avenue, blocks from the Capitol building. Nothing like this has ever existed before. So this is very historic that this is here and that we're here. There's so much to say, and I don't want to repeat what the other speakers have said because it's so graphic, it's so compelling. This is an epic battle between people fighting against all odds for liberation against a settler, colonial, fascist regime. And unlike World War II or the area right before World War II during the terrible Holocaust in Europe against Jews, against Roma people, against gay people, against communists, unlike that Holocaust that went on for 7 years or 8 years or maybe 10 years in total, 1933 to 45, so 12 years. This is a battle that goes on and on and on for decades. And if we talk about Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners, well, what are the Palestinian prisoners other than hostages? And how many are there right now? How many have been taken since October 7th? If you ask people how many Palestinian hostages have been seized from the West Bank since October 7th, 2023, I don't think many people in the United States know the answer to that. But it's about 5,000. Are they prisoners or are they hostages? Well, they're obviously hostages. But as long as you can characterize them as prisoners, the implication is that they did something illegal. They're in jail because of something they did, not because of who they are, when in fact they're in prison being tortured, not because of something they did, but because of who they are. And when you talk about the destruction of a people in whole or in part, then you're absolutely meeting the international definition of genocide. If you kill 5% of the Palestinians in Gaza, I mean, just think of what that number would look like if it was in the United States, right? 5%, that would be 17 million Americans killed in the last 15 months. I mean, we would consider that a genocide, no? If it's 5%, 100,000 dead, that's 5%. But let's say it wasn't 5%. Let's say it's half of that. Why are those Palestinians being killed? Why have they been killed? Because of something they did? No, they're being killed because of who they are. Because they are Palestinians living in Gaza. It's not self-defense. They're being murdered and massacred because of who they are. So it's obviously, by international categories, international definitions, it clearly meets the definition of genocide, the destruction of a people in whole or in part. But there is something that is very significant, I think, for us to consider. The brutality, the violence, the destructiveness, the genocide. I mean, you can't not be depressed. You cannot avoid depression about that. The horror is too great. But when you think about what's actually happened in the last 15 or 16 months, and you look at Gaza today, when the Israeli hostages were released, and tens of thousands of Palestinians came out, along with resistance fighters, along with them. It's clearly a sign that the people of Gaza's will to struggle has not been crushed. How does one define victory in a war? Well, Clausewitz, the great Prussian military theorist who everybody quotes, including West Point, they say, well, you occupy the enemy's territory. The Palestinians' territory has clearly been occupied, not since October 8th, but since 1967, coming on 60 years. I'm talking about Gaza, not historic Palestine in total. Okay, so the Israelis have occupied the territory. Have they defeated the other side's army? Well, in a way, it's Palestinian cities and towns and hospitals and universities and schools that have been destroyed, not Israelis. So in one way, you can say, yeah, the Israelis have a major, big, significant, well-financed army, and the other side are guerrilla fighters, which is not a, quote, normal army. But the third and most important criteria that Clausewitz identified as victory in war is the ability to defeat the will of the enemy to keep fighting. Because no matter how big an army is, we just saw in Syria, their army was quite large, but the will to fight was not there, so the regime ended quickly. In Vietnam, the United States had a much bigger army than the Vietnamese, but the American will to fight had ended by 1972 and 73, and so the U.S., in spite of the fact that it killed 3 million Vietnamese people, lost the war. They succeeded in killing, genocidally, by the way, the Vietnamese people. 3 million dead Vietnamese, that's genocide too. But who won the war? Well, the Vietnamese won the war because the U.S. had not compelled the Vietnamese such that they gave up the will to fight. They didn't defeat them because of that. The people in Gaza, the people in the West Bank, the people in historic Palestine, and the Palestinian diaspora, as we could see from the past 16 months, far from having given up the will to fight, has shown the world that nothing the Israelis have done in terms of this lunatic, genocidal killing spree has been able to crush the spirit, steadfast, and resilience of the Palestinian people. And in that sense, the Palestinian people have not been defeated. They have not been defeated. And I would make the argument, in terms of a long term, and it may not be that long, Israel has suffered a major historic setback because the entire world, including right here in the United States, in the country without which Israel cannot continue to do what it has done, there has been a sea change in public opinion. That's real. That's not rhetoric. On November 4th, 1 month after October 7th, there were 500,000 of us here in Washington, D.C. On January 13th, hundreds of thousands more. On June 8th, there was tens of thousands. On July 24th, when Netanyahu came here, we had tens of thousands of people, including 9 major labor unions, which historically never did anything for Palestine. They were there speaking. The encampments that spread like wildfire when the New York City police shut down or tried to shut down the encampment at Columbia, they went everywhere. Can the Israeli Zionist settler colonial project really exist long term when the entire world despises it, when the whole world has turned against it, and when the people inside the United States themselves, maybe not the majority, but a very large minority, have now militantly turned against the pro-Israeli narrative and are now embracing the cause of the Palestinian people? Why is this important? Because I think if we look at the situation, there is a sense that is unavoidable because of the grief and the anger and the depression that comes based on the genocidal impact that this assault on the people of Gaza has made. But I think about it also from the point of view of what happened in apartheid South Africa. Let's just remember, right now, everybody thinks Nelson Mandela. We love Nelson Mandela now, just like the United States later learned to love Martin Luther King Jr., even though he was the most hated man in America at the time he was murdered in 1968. In the early 1980s, when I first came to Washington, D.C., Nelson Mandela was in jail. He was officially a terrorist, just like Hamas. The United States only voted in the House of Representatives in 1988 to remove Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress from the terrorism list. The designation, it wasn't the same terrorism list that we have today, but Mandela and the ANC in South Africa were terrorists. And a few years later, Nelson Mandela became president of South Africa. What changed? The whole world turned against the apartheid South African regime. The whole world. The boycott of South Africa was so pervasive that even the sponsors of racist apartheid in South Africa, that would be British colonialism and U.S. imperialism, they decided better to have a negotiated end to the situation in South Africa rather than have a full-scale revolution. We have to think about this in a global, international, and historical way. Otherwise, our depression will paralyze us. And we don't need to be paralyzed. We need to fight. Even if there's no guarantee of success, we have to fight. If we don't fight, if we don't stand up, if we don't do everything in our power to say no to the genocide, we in fact facilitate its success. And the only way it will be defeated is when the Palestinian people have in their ranks the American people, the people in the UK, the French, the Germans. Of course, people in the global south were already with Palestine. The big transformation that's happened in the last 15 months is inside the center of the countries that are really the main sponsors of the Zionist project. Inside these countries, public opinion has shifted. Go and ask young people about Palestine in America today. Maybe their parents are still pretty backward, but young people have turned. And it's not just college students, and it's not just high school students, young working class people. You go on social media, people are with Palestine. The comedy jokes, I saw this, I don't know if you saw it on Instagram. No, I don't spend that much time on Instagram, but the comedians shouting out to the people in the audience, where are you from? Somebody says, Germany, and somebody says France, and somebody else yells Israel, and he says, oh, cool, what part of Palestine are you from? And then he continues to mock the Israeli who's trying to defend themselves, and the entire club is obviously with the comedian. It's emblematic of what's happened. Public opinion has shifted. It's shifted in a way it's never going to shift back. It's not going to be like in 5 years, Israel is going to recover from this. My point isn't that this is going to be easy. Clearly, the Palestinians know more than anyone how uneasy this is. But the Palestinian people are not stopping. They're not giving up. It's going to take a long time to rebuild Gaza. I think a large part of the Israeli population is making sure that they have their second and third passport in order because they can leave. They can go to France or Germany or Brooklyn. It's a settler colonial regime. They can leave. And if the whole world treats Israel as a pariah state, which is how it should be treated and is being treated, this isolation of Israel will have a profound impact on the ability of the settler regime to continue to recruit new people who, under the banner of Judaism, say that this part of the world belongs to them, that the Bible gave it to them as a real estate deed. Big parts of the population in Israel will leave. I think, I asked Miko on my podcast at the beginning a year ago, I said, what's going to happen? And Miko, nobody could accuse Miko of having rose-colored glasses on or having a Pollyannish approach to the problem. He knows the serious nature of it. But you said the days of the Zionist regime are numbered, that this project will end. The colonial era is going to end fully. The last bastion of it is Israel. The last bastion of it is Israel, and the Palestinian people, in spite of all of these decades of sort of hardship, why does the world sort of recognize the small people, small land? Because they are the vanguard of the struggle against colonialism in the 21st century, the century after we thought colonialism was dead. And so the Palestinians and the Palestinian cause will be a magnet. It will continue to be a magnet for solidarity and support. We can't let down here. That's my final message. We got to do everything we can. We've been doing it every day. All of us, I think, have been doing it every day. But even if there's a, quote, ceasefire, and it's not the end of the war, certainly it's not the end of the war, we can't let down. This is the time to put our foot on the pedal, to turn up the gas, to make it really impossible for the Israelis to normalize their presence here or anywhere else. And I think all of us together can do that. All right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brian. I think just to capitalize on two points you made, one is that we have to think of it globally, or else we're going to lose our mind if we think of every single detail, and we can't stop the death of a child right now. But if we do think long-term and we do think globally about Palestine, and we fight for the freedom and the liberation of Palestine, and we understand it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it can happen if we do act, that's exactly what this Palestine House of Freedom is about. It's about creating that strategy that will bring to the liberation of Palestine, make it a reality. That's really what the space, that's what we do in those offices, that's what we do on social media, that's what we're planning, that's the conversation, those are the conversations that we're having so that we can have that kind of impact, which again is sadly not gonna happen tomorrow, but that we can have that kind of impact through strategy, through real planning to bring about the dismantling of the apartheid state, just like we've seen other regimes that you mentioned dismantled and fall, and the liberation, full liberation of all of historic Palestine. So thank you for that. Omar, are you still there?
Yes, I'm around.
Okay, thanks. I want to ask you, Omar, you're in this space, you're doing a lot of interviews, you're in the media. I wanted to ask you what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what kind of discourse. Are we still in the moment? Are we still in this time where the first question is, do you condemn? Are we still in this condemnation first mode, or have we gone beyond that?
So I think we have gone beyond that, thankfully. But there's still the framing remains incredibly problematic nonetheless. The framing continues to be one in which, rather than acknowledge that Israel is waging a deliberate war on the civilian population in Gaza, we talk about Israeli excesses as if they're an accident, that Israel somehow is legitimate in trying to defend itself, but have they gone overboard? Have too many people been killed? Do they need to be more careful? And there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what Israel's intentions are. It's not collateral damage that is causing civilian deaths in Gaza. It is a war to make Gaza unlivable. It is a war on the Palestinian people in Gaza in order to destroy their ability to sustain life in Gaza. That is what is unfolding. And that continues to be missed, and it's incredibly aggravating that that frame is not permitted to enter that discourse. The genocidal intent, in spite of the fact that so many experts are now talking about this genocide openly, all the major human rights organizations are at this point on board with the idea that Israel is waging this war on the civilian population. That is not reflected in the headlines. It's not reflected in the interviews. And I just want to comment on one thing that Brian said that I think is really important. We are indeed witnessing this significant shift in public opinion on this. But what remains disturbing is that it is still split by age. People who consume information through the internet have a much better understanding of what is unfolding in Gaza. But people who remain reliant on traditional and legacy media, typically people who are 40 and above, continue to have a warped understanding of this issue. And what's disturbing to me is the fact that the entire political class in this country continues to be the dinosaurs in Congress, who are all 40 and 50 and above. And that means that for the foreseeable future, even though we are witnessing this sea change in public opinion, and there's no question that in the long term, what Israel's doing is unsustainable and continuing to get U.S. backing for it is unsustainable, for the foreseeable future, for the coming few years, we are still stuck in a dynamic in which that political establishment that is incredibly old and entrenched is going to be driving policy. And that's part of the reason why Israel feels the need to hurry and quote unquote finish the job in the meantime, because they know that they're working against the clock. And I just want to flag the fact that we are indeed working against the clock, and it's something that we should be mindful of, is that we should not take too much comfort in the idea that things are changing and the good side is going to eventually win no matter what. We, every single day that we fall short of achieving that change in policy, is another day in which Palestinian lives are being destroyed. And so there is an incredible urgency to the fact that we all have to speak up and be as aggressive as we possibly can, even in the face of the repression that the Trump administration is bringing our way, in order to save as many Palestinians as possible and save Palestine's ability to live and sustain this unprecedented assault on its existence.
Yes, the urgency is. We should never forget the sense of urgency. I think everybody agrees on that. I wanted to ask you. You're in that space of policy and outreach. You just came from the building over there, from the Capitol. What are you seeing? Are you seeing any movement? Are you seeing any sense that any walls are being, any cracks in that wall of support for the Zionist project?
Yeah, well, I'm taking a break. My reprieve is a break from Palestine advocacy on the Hill because the last year and a half were exhausting. I'm not taking an actual break, so don't use that as, I'm gonna do the work. But yes, so last year, I was with American Muslims for Palestine and Americans for Justice in Palestine Action, and I was doing a lot of advocacy within, the whole last year, but in particular, the first 3 months of the genocide, Congress was in disarray. Like, they were so frantic. They had no idea how to respond to anything because they had never received engagement on the Hill from pro-Palestine constituents at the level that they did, at the scale that they did from October of 2023 forward. So the first, I want to say 2 to 3 months, obviously the response was very dehumanizing from a lot of moderate Democrats, obviously Republicans. When the first ceasefire resolution came to be, it was 17 members of the House who were all people of color. Not a single white member of Congress was on there. Later on, there was it ended with over 100. But it just kind of shows you how our narrative didn't exist on the Hill, because obviously we know that the Zionist lobby has controlled the narrative since the occupation began. And so, like Brian mentioned, and Omar, over the last year and a half, we've witnessed a massive shift. So being on the Hill from October to January of 2023 was a significantly different experience than being on the Hill now. Obviously, there's a lot more education. Is the suppression still there? Yes. Is the ignorance still there? Yes. Is Zionism still there? Of course. But for example, just to put it into perspective for you, in 2021, the idea of talking about cutting or ending aid to Israel, military aid to Israel, was considered so radical, you could not utter those words in the halls of Congress at all. Now, because of the advocacy and this massive shift of public opinion that translated into political and congressional advocacy, members of Congress themselves are saying we need to condition or cut aid to Israel, right? Even though the number is smaller, it's bigger in the House than it is in the Senate. But we saw Bernie Sanders force a vote on withholding aid from Israel. It didn't pass, it didn't work, but that's huge. We never saw that before. And I know working in policy and engaging in policy is as a Palestinian, and then talking about it is so honestly exhausting, because for a lot of people, especially younger people, I think it's a conversation that people don't want to have. It's uncomfortable. It feels hopeless and helpless, and I get it. Trust me. Last year, I get it. But unfortunately, we live in the belly of the beast. I mean, we're literally a few blocks down from the Hill, right? If you live in America, it doesn't matter, you're Palestinian, Arab, not, whatever it is, you have to face that we are single-handedly aiding and abetting the occupation as a country, and we can't pull our hand from that. All methods of advocacy and activism are important, and they coexist, right? You have the protests and the rallies, you have BDS, you have demonstrations, you have political advocacy, you have actually running for office, you have engaging with your elected officials. They all matter. But the truth of the matter is, we are not going to liberate Palestine as people in America, right? We're not liberating Palestine. We are a tool for Palestinians in Palestine to liberate themselves. But we are a key tool. America, being in America, we are the top tool because of the amount of military and political backing that we give and provide the occupation, right? I mean, we saw Biden literally provide backing at the UN. He isolated the United States so much that we stood alone at some point in voting against ceasefire resolutions, simple ceasefire resolutions. And so, yes, there has been a massive shift on the Hill. And what I want to focus on real quick is Biden was one thing. He's a staunch Zionist that activated and supported, not blindly, very, very awake, supported the genocide and backed the occupation over the last 15 months. But now something a little bit more dangerous that we're entering, and Omar kind of touched on this, is the dangers of Trump is that, number one, he will give Israel the right carte blanche to do whatever it wants. We've seen it already. The one small good thing Biden did for us was put sanctions on the most extreme settlers in the West Bank, and one of the first things he did was lift it when he came back into office. And now you're seeing the West Bank on fire. Granted, the West Bank has been on fire for the last year, and they've taken advantage of the fact that our attention is on Gaza to continue the military occupation. But the danger with Trump is the suppression that's going to come under him. And we're already seeing it. We are going to be significantly silenced and propaganda. We all know Trump is a propagandist on every level. If you saw how he spoke about the plane crash this morning, he's the president of the United States and has access to information and couldn't even say the correct thing. Not that Biden didn't do the same thing, but it's going to be on a larger level. Now, for the last year, we've already seen the efforts to silence dissent, right? There was an oversight committee that was looking into the top Palestinian organizations and Jewish organizations like JVP Action and JVP, and tying them to like Hamas and whatever. So it's trying to silence dissent. Now, yesterday, Trump signed an executive order targeting pro-Palestine students. And obviously this is a part of the larger agenda to silence dissent and shut down organizing for Palestine. But under this executive order, millions of green card holders and student visa holders are now going to face the threat of their visas being revoked and being deported because of their support for Palestinian freedom. And now they're hiding this under the guise of anti-Semitism. And we know what they mean when they do that. And so we should expect an incoming flow of legislation like this, executive orders. But again, back to Umar's point, Trump is doing a lot of chaotic things right now. Like he's only been in office for a week and a half, and the amount of damage he's already caused is insane. So like, give or take, sometimes he's gonna be distracted and we'll be okay, and other times we're really not going to be okay. So yes, Congress has shifted, and everything has shifted because public opinion has shifted. But now where the key is Palestinians in Gaza get reprieve and they get to rest. We don't. In fact, now we need to double down and center Palestine and Palestinians in the media, within government, within every crevice of this country. Palestine should be centered, and we should be talking about it every single day, but especially within the government, because they're also distracted with a lot of things. And like I said earlier, because they granted a ceasefire or helped facilitate a ceasefire, now they think they can lift their hand and they're like the world saviors. So a lot has changed, but not enough, and it is up to us. And it's something that Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank demand of us. Throughout the genocide, they saw what we were doing and how we were advocating on the Hill, and they asked for it, for us to continue it. So that's the least that we can give them.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yep. I wanted. I'm so glad you raised the new executive order on fighting anti-Semitism, which of course is just a banner out, and the real goal is to frighten, to intimidate Arab American and Palestinian students in particular. Even though it's an across-the-board kind of repression that's going on against people who are standing with Palestine, this new executive order has to be looked at very carefully. Mara, I don't know if you object to me mentioning you without your approval, but Mara's with the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund. They're a legal team that just issued a statement about this new executive order because it's such a profound threat against Palestinian and Arab American students on college campuses, and a complete violation of the part of the Constitution that the American government has told us when we were children is the most important part of the Constitution, which is our right to assemble, our right to speak, our right to redress grievances. It's called the First Amendment. And now, under the banner of fighting anti-Semitism, they're trying to deprive students who have made such a difference in the last year, as we all know from the encampments, trying to completely victimize them, repress them. There's already a lot of repression going on college campuses. But now the threat to deport, to arrest or deport Arab American students or other students who are visa holders, this is designed to chill people's ability to speak out. So what do? This is always the question. Yes, Trump is doing this. Yes, Congress is, there is progress in Congress, but not enough. This is really a question for us. If we consider ourselves the grassroots, we have to stand with these students. We have to like take it upon ourselves to find out more about the executive orders and expose them for what they are. What was anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish about saying that you oppose genocide and you're standing next to a Jewish student? Yeah, the Jewish students were in many places leading the encampment. Go to Colombia. I mean, who was really driving that? There were Palestinian students. There were non-Jewish and non-Palestinian students, but there were a lot of Jewish American young people leading this thing. Are they anti-Semites? Well, according to this new executive order, apparently. But the threat of deportation, of people losing their ability to go to school, that's being targeted really against Arab American, Palestinian, and South Asian foreign students, basically. So Mara, if you're around, I want people to say hello to you and also to go to your website. There are other organizations too that I'm sure are fighting, AMP and many, many others, but this is a real escalation on the part of the Trump administration. We really have to take it seriously. And again, it's one of those things, if everyone is intimidated and running for the hills, they win. If we stand together and fight and mobilize, we can win. The only way we know we can never win is if we don't fight, if we don't mobilize. So this is the only option, I think, in front of us.
Yeah, actually, Brian, I wanted to ask you, you've been behind a lot of mobilizing over the years, and well, the question has two parts. It has to do with Netanyahu's visit next week. We're seeing all these things happening, the executive order you just mentioned, but we've also seen a freeze on some of the foreign aid. From what I understand, even the foreign aid going to Jordan was put on a freeze, which is very strange. What are you? So two things. One, do you have any expectation? What are your expectation, anticipation from this meeting between these two people? And number two, what kind of mobilization do you think is going to be taking place during that day? Because if you ask me, I mean, I don't know if we're probably not going to see that, but what we should see is the city should be completely shut down on that day. What are you seeing? What sensing is going to happen?
In terms of what Trump is threatening not only America's traditional adversaries, but he's threatening basically everybody, right? Including regimes that were considered to be proxies or allies or puppets. He's threatening everybody because his hubris and arrogance is so off the charts that I believe this will backfire. Part of the American power wasn't simply the military and the CIA and all that. The idea of soft power, of the idea that this was a democracy in a wealthy country and all those kind of things, Trump is just beating the rest of the world up. Yeah. And I think it will backfire because it's not the 19th century. The colonizers could treat the colonized people any way they wanted to. When the U.S. invaded Haiti in 1915, when Woodrow Wilson sent in the Marines and they marched into Port-au-Prince and they took all the money out of the Bank of Haiti and brought it to New York City, to Citibank, they didn't say, oh, we're doing this to help the Haitian people. They just did it because they could do it. They didn't care what other people thought. Well, in the 21st century, public opinion actually matters. Public opinion matters, and when you have President of the United States treating the rest of the world like they're going to be colonial slaves and threatening everybody, I think it will backfire. I think Trump is in his honeymoon phase right now, but I think this is going to backfire. That's my prediction. And I don't even believe in making predictions, but I feel that this is too much for the rest of the world. The rest of the world does not want to be treated like this. In terms of Tuesday, when Trump is meeting with Netanyahu, I've been in New York, so I'm not really the person to know what the scale of the mobilization is. I know the Answer Coalition, I think the Palestinian Youth Movement, you may know other organizations locally who are mobilizing. I really hope a lot of people come out. They should come out. I think Trump is serious when he says, let's cleanse Gaza and take all the people and take them to Egypt and so on and so forth. I mean, Trump really thinks that he's got his finger on, like, he can control everything right now. This is a fantasy. This is not going to happen. This is BS. But Trump doesn't know that because he just thinks, yeah, everybody's bending on knee to me, and so I'm gonna make the Palestinians bend, and I'm gonna make Egypt bend, and then it's all gonna happen, and then we're gonna build Donald Trump casinos in Gaza, and it'll be great. It'll be great. He said it'll be beautiful. It'll be really beautiful. This is a fantasy on the part of Trump, but I think he's gonna use the visit to pursue this public relations campaign that the people in Gaza need to be driven out of Gaza. And again, the Palestinians are not going, people in Gaza are not going to do that, but we need to answer that very forcefully and say, this is a complete fantasy, a hubris, arrogance, colonizing mentality, and the rest of the world won't accept it.
Well, I certainly hope we don't accept it. I think this city should be shut down on that day. Everybody should be in the streets, blocking roads.
Let's do it. Who can come out and demonstrate?
Everybody's got to be out. Everybody's got to be out.
Okay.
I mean, this is.
You can go to answer. I know you can go to the Facebook, Twitter, or whatever it's called now, Instagram of Answer Coalition, Palestinian Youth Movement, and other groups to find out where and when for Tuesday.
All right. Let's open it up for a few questions. We still have a little time, so if anybody want to ask questions, what we'll do is you just ask the question there. I'll repeat it on the mic, and then we'll whoever it is that you want to ask the question of will answer. Please. So I'll paraphrase. Tell me if I'm way off. The root causes and the connection of capitalism to the root cause of the support for Zionism in this country. Who wants to take that? Brian, you want to start?
Well, the U.S. didn't always think of Israel as an extension of American power. It's important to remember this part of history. In 1956, Israel, with the support of Britain and France, invaded Egypt over the Suez. And the United States at that time, under Eisenhower, opposed the Israeli incursion into Egypt. So did the Soviet Union, more militantly, of course. And the invasion stopped. Once the Americans put their foot down, the invasion of Egypt by Israel ended. In 1967, when the U.S. was bogged down in Vietnam, losing in Vietnam, and there was basically a revolutionary wave throughout the Middle East and in other parts of what we now call global South countries, Israel's invasion, the Six-Day War in June 1967, the seizure of the West Bank, the Gaza, the Golan Heights, and big parts of Egypt, the defeat of the Arab armies, proved to the American government that Israel could get the job done. And I think what basically happened is that the U.S. policy shifted to see Israel as an extension of American military power in this resource-rich part of the world where 2/3 of the world's oil was. So the U.S. was bogged down in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Laos, couldn't fight in the Middle East, but Israel could. So the U.S. saw Israel as an extension of the American empire, basically. And this is when Israel and the U.S. became connected at the hip. There was, of course, the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, and all that, which is very powerful. But it wasn't only the lobby. It was also that strategic policy-making thinkers in the Pentagon, the CIA, et cetera, thought of Israel as a necessary extension of American power in the Middle East. That's important because it also demonstrates that the U.S. could, at a certain point, see Israel as a liability, because it saw Israel as a liability once upon a time in 1956. It's only since 1967, which is not only, I mean, it's almost 60 years, that Israel has functioned like this. And that's why I believe the U.S. Has always given a carte blanche, always a blank check to the Israelis. It's not simply the Israeli lobby, even though they are powerful. So I think American empire is an empire based on the needs of capital. Working class people in the United States don't have investments in the Middle East, or in Asia, or in Latin America, or anywhere. But America's corporations do. And so I see Israel as part of this military apparatus to defend the capitalist empire rooted in Wall Street and Wall Street banks and basically corporate America.
I'll just say something about the 1956. My father was the military governor after that invasion, and when Eisenhower spoke as military governor, he was given, I don't know, something like 8 weeks to get the hell out and, evacuate the troops. So there was a time when America spoke and Israel listened. Anybody else?
Adlai Stevenson, by the way, criticized Eisenhower in the 56 campaign for, Adlai Stevenson was the Democratic candidate, condemned Eisenhower for not being pro-Israel enough. So the Republicans weren't at that time considered on board with the Israeli project. Just historically interesting.
When you're old enough, you remember these things.
I was young then.
I'm kidding.
Come on, man. That's
no,
a
you and I
low
are
blow.
on the same page here. Any questions? Yes, please.
So we talk about Netanyahu coming here and getting, what was it, 30 standing ovations from Congress. 50, 100, yeah. The question of AIPAC and the question of the 535 humans, if you will, what is the fear of political fear, political suicide from these members to going against AIPAC? And until we can change these folks giving 50 standing ovations to a Hitler-like persona, they can't all be so non-human, or to think brown people or Palestinians are not human. What is the fear? Is it losing the political office? And how do we fight that fear? Because I believe AIPAC has talk about occupying. AIPAC occupies the U.S. Congress.
Right.
So how do we fight that? Because these people are all fearful of this AIPAC, that they blindly say yes to the Zionist movement in this country.
Aya, you want to take that?
Yeah. That's a good characterization. AIPAC does occupy the U.S. government, period. Fun fact about Netanyahu's visit, though, is a lot of Congress members did not show up. So they bought a bunch of billionaires to fill up the room. If you remember, Elon Musk was there. That's when that whole thing started. So a lot of people, including Kamala Harris, did not show up to that. And actually, a lot of American politicians just dislike Netanyahu. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're not pro-Israel, but people hate Bibi. That's just a matter of fact. Even Biden, before the genocide started, refused to allow him to enter the White House.
Even his wife hates him.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's a Trump situation. So what we're coming up against here, which was what I wanted to mention earlier, is it's great. This mass public shift that's happened over the last year should have happened a long time ago. There have been a lot of organizations and activists and advocates for decades that have done the work that we're trying to mobilize everybody to do now, which is lobby on the Hill. But unfortunately, it hasn't been this consistent collective effort where we got constituents. So a few points about AIPAC. Number one, the Zionist lobby has existed since the establishment of Israel, if not before, right? So you're talking about an entity that has been down the throats of elected officials for over 75 years, right? Last year, or a couple years ago actually, when I was doing advocacy days for Palestine, a bunch of offices, like more moderate, left-leaning offices, would be like, this is great that you're doing this every year, but like we need more constituents that are pushing the Palestinian narrative or correcting the narrative more so on the Hill consistently, because AIPAC constituents and lobbyists are on the Hill every week, in and outside of the genocide. Every week they're in these offices. But backtracking to before a candidate is elected, Summerlee is a prime example. Why did AIPAC continue to attack her so much? Because she refused. She was the first sitting member of Congress to refuse to take any money from AIPAC. But what they do before they even give you money is when you run, not even when you're elected, they have you fill out a questionnaire on your position on Israel. And because AIPAC truly does occupy Congress, they have sects of the organization or the lobby that are assigned to each district in the country. So any policy, and it's not just that any policy that pertains to Israel, it's policies in general. Any policy that comes that they want to lobby for or against, they immediately activate their members, and right away you have talking points. So like it's a very strategic, consistent effort that has existed for decades. So that's what we're sitting against, let alone the money, right? So the money is one thing, the consistency and talking points is another. So us collectively as like pro-Palestine constituents in America, we have to undo all of that. And that means having enough people advocate and talk to their elected officials in district and in DC every week. So it can't just be when mass slaughter is happening, right? And that's something that we kept saying. Even if you get a ceasefire, you can't rest. We don't get a moment of rest. This is actually where we should be fighting harder, right? So it's about being in their offices every single week and telling them and centering the Palestinian narrative. It's telling them, I do not want my tax dollars funding the occupation. I do not want my hard-earned worked money while we're sitting in one of the most horrific moments in the United States where our education is trash, our houseless population is growing every single second, everything, our access to food, our water, literally everything is deteriorating in this country. And our tax dollars are funding a genocidal war machine. And so that is, you are talking about consistent collective effort. And that's exactly why I say, yes, it's uncomfortable and it feels helpless. And it feels helpless because of what we're working against. But that's truthfully the only way. We have to be consistent and let them know that we're here and we're not going to forget. It doesn't matter if we got a ceasefire. We're not going to forget. We do not want to be funding the occupation, point blank, period. That's the only way, with the other mechanisms, which is like BDS, because you need to hit them where it hurts, and where it hurts is the money. Yeah.
Any other question, please? Go ahead.
Actually, I have a lot of questions, but let's just stick to one. The Adelsons. The last time one of the Adelsons gave Trump money, the embassy was moved to Jerusalem. This time, everybody knows about the $100 million donation to Trump to get the West Bank added. Do you think the annexation of the West Bank is pretty much a done deal at this point?
So the question is, I'm sorry, I forgot to repeat the previous one, but the question is the massive donations by the Adelson family, and will it bring about the full annexation of the West Bank? Omar, you want to take that?
Sure, happy to. The annexation of the West Bank, in terms of the reality on the ground, has been a done deal for many years, frankly. The extent of the entrenchment of Israeli settlements, the roads that connect those settlements that Palestinians can't drive on, the integration of the Jordan Valley on the eastern side of the West Bank that Palestinians cannot access. Israel has integrated the West Bank into its own land and has isolated Palestinians into tiny isolated Bandustans throughout that territory. So the question is only whether Israel is going to formally announce that annexation that is already a reality on the ground. And I think it is very likely that this is what they're planning on doing under the Trump administration. We saw it in the characters that Trump has picked. The person that Trump has appointed as the ambassador to the UN is somebody who, during her confirmation hearing before the Senate, said that she believes that Israel has a biblical right to all of the West Bank. Now, imagine this is the person you're sending over to the UN, allegedly the institution that's supposed to be all about international law, and the message you're sending is you don't give a damn about international law when you send somebody like that over to the UN. And the same with the ambassador pick to Israel, Mike Huckabee, is also a religious fanatic who believes that Israel should take all of the West Bank, and they believe the Palestinians should be displaced out of that land. So I think that annexation is likely to be declared officially during the Trump administration. And the real fight is then what? How does the rest of the world react? Does Israel engage in a wider onslaught the way they're currently engaging in Jenin in order to displace the entire Palestinian population out of the West Bank? What will Jordan's reaction be like when they get that Israel is serious about pushing Palestinians out of the West Bank? There's a lot of factors about what shape that is going to take in specifics, but I find it very likely that this is the plan for them moving forward. I will say one last thing just about the previous question about AIPAC that I think is worth noting. Conventional wisdom for a very long time in Washington has been that AIPAC is very powerful and Americans don't care about Israel-Palestine. And we all know that politicians don't care about right or wrong. What they care about is doing what's in their political interest. It's about holding on to their seats in Congress and in the Senate. Principles mean nothing. Self-interest means everything. And between a population that does not care about this issue and a very powerful Israel lobby, there's no point in taking the wrong position on this because there's very little to benefit from and a very significant cost to pay if AIPAC mobilizes and starts funding your opponent, and they've defeated many people in Congress since. Now, things have changed in terms of public opinion and the level of dissatisfaction and, frankly, disgust there is with unconditional U.S. support for Israel, then that calculus has shifted in a way that I think many in Congress are still slow to pick up on. Most of them operate in an outdated mindset. They say we support Israel right or wrong reflexively without paying attention to how much public opinion has shifted in the Democratic Party, where a majority of Democrats at this point favor suspending U.S. military aid to Israel or reducing it at least because of the way Israel treats Palestinians. And AIPAC sees that change, and they are fighting back harder. Interestingly, they fight back without bringing up Israel because they know that's no longer a winning issue on merit. So they mobilize against people like Jamal Bowen, push him out of Congress, but the attacks on him are not about Israel, they're about everything else. And that to me is a sign that AIPAC is still a formidable power, unquestionably, as we've seen with what they've done in this most recent election, but also one that is fearful of the fact that there's been the significant shift in public opinion and one that we should continue capitalizing on and pushing. It's a fight. It's no longer one-sided. Conventional wisdom that AIPAC gets its way and everybody else should shut up and sit down if they want to have a political career is no longer a reality. AIPAC wins some, and people who support Palestinian humanity and decency and human rights are also winning seats in Congress. And so we have to keep pushing that fight and actually until we dismantle the myth that people have to be obedient to AIPAC in order to have a political career.
Thank you for that. And actually, I don't know if you guys remember, but Cori Bush came out with this cry of, she's going to bring AIPAC down. She was here the other day. We had a very long and interesting conversation, and I think she's actually, well, we're all going to rally behind her to get that done. It's time to end, so I know everybody's got a lot more questions, but it is time to go, or at least to end this. So I want to thank our guests. Brian, thank you again for coming down from New York. Aya, thank you so much. Omar, thank you for participating, even though you're not feeling well. And Layla, who's gone, but thank her as well. And thank all of you for coming and supporting. Like Jinan was saying earlier, we make this space available for events like this, for events organized by other organizations. We have QR codes if anybody wants to make a donation. We've got lots of different options in terms of donations. We've established what we call the Freedom Funder Society, which is a donation at a higher level. If anybody wants to talk to me about that, I'm happy to chat. But thank you again, and you're always welcome to come back to work here, to see us, to chat, to come to events. Maybe Jinan, you want to mention what's coming up in terms of events, so people can write it down.
Yeah, considering I'm the one that plans everything. Just had to throw that in one more time. So we have a calendar of events on our website that is updated regularly, but our social media is updated more regularly. So follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, all of the sites. So we have a pretty busy couple of months coming up. So in February, we'll be co-hosting a Black Palestinian Solidarity event with Arab America. We'll also be doing an event on Palestinian political prisoners with one of the daughters of the Holy Land Foundation 5. And in March, it is Ramadan, but we'll be doing a couple of events during Ramadan. We'll also be hosting an art exhibit by the Gaza artist Malak Matar. And then we'll be doing Land Day celebration. We're actually postponing it into the first weekend of April because of Ramadan. It's going to be kind of an all-day event. So make sure you... Oh, I forgot. During Ramadan, we'll be doing an Arab Mother's Day iftar, obviously honoring all of our Palestinian mothers. That'll be on March 20th. So it'll be an iftar because it's during Ramadan. So again, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. QR code is right here. When you make a donation as well, you can sign up. That way you can get all of our communication for all of the events that are coming up. Some of the events are subject to change, different dates depending on our speakers, but like I said, we're always hosting events and we always host events with other groups. And so there's always something for someone, right? So we hope that our programming is diverse enough that everyone feels welcome and everyone enjoys what we put on. And again, I want to thank all of our amazing volunteers. Let's give them a round of applause. Willow does all of our videography and our live streaming, very professional setup. And make sure you go check out Layla's table in the back, buy some goodies. They're hand-stitched from Al Khalil, from Hebron. And I wanna like focus on that because as someone, I do food education and I'm a chef, I do Palestinian cooking events. Our culture as Palestinians is so important for us to preserve because that is a way for the occupation to erase us as a people. And so hosting Palestinian food events for me is a form of resilience and celebrating the art of tatriz and celebrating all of the things that we do that make us Palestinian, our music, our dance, our poetry, our dress, everything is a way for you to be a part of that resilience. And so make sure you guys take a look and take a piece of that home with you. So again, thanks to all of our panelists, thanks to my boss, who I wouldn't have a job without, so please don't get rid of me. And then we will see you guys soon at our next events. Thanks again for coming.